one of the challenges that we all struggle with in B2B sales is just aligning all of the different stakeholders involved in a typical B2B purchase. Heck, the whole point of Framemaking is that those stakeholders have a really tough time aligning themselves to each other, irrespective of your input or not. And so one of the things we need to figure out is there a way that we might actually be able to help proactively in bringing them together, not in their mutual love of us, but in just our mutual agreement on what they're trying to do in the first place. And one of the things they're going to need to do to find that kind of agreement is to have a common framework, or if you will, rubric. And the framework that we suggest in the Framemaking sale is what we call OTR, or Objectives, Tactics, and Results. It is a framework that has sort of three key dimensions: objectives, tactics, and results. And we take results and break them down even further into metrics, targets, and timelines. So you have objectives, tactics, metrics, targets, and timelines, which is what are we trying to do? How are we trying to do it? How we measure our progress? How will we know when we get there? That's our target. And how long is that going to take? And if your customers aren't aligned across those 5 different dimensions, it's going to be very hard for them to actually reach consensus on what they're trying to do. Not what they're trying to buy, but just what they're trying to do. And for that matter, how they'll know when they get there. And what's interesting is in this world where you can where you might, your stakeholders are struggling with alignment across OTR, is that they could be in fact aligned on your solution and your value. So individually, maybe even collectively, they've all looked at you and said, we love your solution. We think you're the right answer for this particular problem. But if they haven't agreed that that is in fact the problem that they need to address next or first or at all, it doesn't matter that they agree that you're the best solution to address that problem. And this is what can happen in this world where your customer or your stakeholder looks you in the eye and says, well, not only do I love what you do, but we love what you do as a company. And you're feeling like, well, this feels great. This thing's coming in, this quarter. I can put it in the forecast with a huge likelihood to close against it. And then you get the call, and the call is something to the effect of, we love what you guys do, but we've decided to go in a different direction. And this is a company, or at least a group of stakeholders, that after, deliberation or maybe lack of deliberation has either decided that they just can't align across objectives, tactics, metrics, targets, timelines. One of those 5 dimensions has created some sort of impasse that they just can't align on. Therefore, they've just decided to wait and see, study it more, take a longer look, whatever it might be. Or they have aligned, but they've just aligned in a way that means your solution is great, but just not relevant or germane to that particular direction they've ultimately chosen to go in. So one of the things I think becomes critical in both those scenarios is that we perhaps can take not only a proactive role, but frankly a helpful role in working with our customers to collaboratively make sure that they are aligned across objectives, tactics, metrics, targets, and timelines. And that can take the form of a conversation, a Zoom call, a Teams call. It could take the form of an in-person conversation. It can happen synchronously or asynchronously. Ideally, it happens in the form of what we call a customer alignment workshop, where essentially your role then becomes the role not of seller, but really a facilitator, in helping them understand sort of, the degree to which they agree on an objective, a common objective. And you might, in that particular context, prompt them to think about objectives or dimensions of an objective they might have overlooked. And working with other customers like you, that's the phrase that frames, we've talked about before, we have found that when there's a discussion around this objective, there's a certain dimension that gets overlooked, kind of to our surprise too. And so I can play this very helpful role of framing in sort of coaching customers to explore the different dimensions of that objective and so on. I could do the same thing. You get the idea across now the tactics, the potential tactics one might pursue to pursue that objective or execute on that objective. The metrics one might use to measure progress, and the targets and the timelines and so on. And you might ask yourself, well, what happens, if customers are unwilling to have that kind of conversation? Well, to me, that becomes a qualification question. If customers aren't willing, either with you or without you, to sit down and have that kind of conversation across those 5 dimensions, you may or may not, more likely not, get something sold now, but the likelihood of them seeing full, realizing the value from that solution when they weren't even clear on what they were trying to achieve in the first place, becomes very unlikely. And so therefore, then you have a renewal problem, a future growth problem, if nothing else, and maybe still even just a sales problem. So we walk through this in our workshops, and one of the best parts of our workshops is working with clients to actually build out the OTR, the objectives, tactics, results, for different stakeholders in the buying group, and then finding points of alignment and misalignment, and essentially putting together a strategy for overcoming that misalignment and helping them sort of coalesce around a common view of those 5 dimensions such that they feel not more confident in your value, maybe they already did, but they feel more confident in their collective agreement that they're going in the right direction, and that right direction brings you along with it.